The video you are about to watch is from an old woodworking magazine that I published during the years of 2003 to approximately 2006. This was a very unique magazine. It was purely video content and it was distributed on DVDs. The magazine ran for approximately 3.5 years, and then due to financial concerns, we simply had to terminate the magazine. We moved on to other things over the last roughly 15 years. However, there has been a request to resurrect this content, so I've gone through the trouble to get the equipment, the products, everything I needed in order to bring this content back to life to share with everyone. Here on this YouTube channel, we'll be putting up approximately 100 to 120 of the original stories that appeared in that magazine. The magazine was called Woodworking at Home Magazine, and it was truly one of a kind in the world. I really hope you enjoy these videos, and please tell your friends about them. For this issue's Time Saver feature, we're going to show you how to take a pile of scrap plywood and turn it into a very handy and very accurate tenoning jig. When making jigs of this type, the first thing I do is hit my scrap pile and find some wood that will work for my application. And in this case, I've got some 3/4 inch MDO plywood. Now, of course, you could use other types of plywood. You do want something that's relatively high quality, that's flat and so forth. Now what I'll do is I'll get started by ripping each of the pieces to their appropriate width. For the narrow components, I'll cut them off here at the compound miter saw. For the best accuracy, make sure that when you cut off your work support to its proper overall length, that you have perfect 90-degree corners everywhere. And that will help make your jig a little more accurate. To do that, on my table saw, I'll be using my shop-made panel cutting jig. I've temporarily clamped the tenoning jig together so that I could fit it over my fence. Now we want it to slide smoothly. We don't want it to bind anywhere as you're feeding it along, but we don't want to have slop. Notice here it wiggles around just too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly re-rip these two spacer boards smaller and smaller until I got a nice smooth fit, but one that doesn't have this much slop. I've taken the time to lay out the locations where I want my two spacer boards to be on the work support and the fence riser. They'll go in these two locations, and to assemble them I'll just be using standard woodworking glue to get everything started. After the glue's had a chance to set up, I'll drive in some screws to further secure that joint. To make sure that my jig is square to the table, I've clamped a precision square on top of my workbench. Then I've just brought the jig into alignment along that square, and then I'll clamp on my fence riser board on the outside edge. Then I'll just leave it sit until the glue's had a chance to dry. For a clamping system to hold our workpiece on our jig, I'm going to be using these DeStaco toggle clamps. You can pick these up at industrial supply houses, and many woodworking suppliers also carry them now. They also have a variety of different plungers that you can use inside the clamp to accommodate different thicknesses of workpieces. I've already gone through and laid out the hole locations for the mounting. Now I'll take it over to the drill press and drill out those holes. Using 4 number 6 by 3/4 inch long sheet metal screws, I'll go ahead and fasten my clamps to our fence. To further strengthen the joint between the work support and the fence riser to the spacers, I'll be driving in number 6 by 1 inch long drywall screws. And of course I've countersunk them so that I don't have any screw heads projecting out. I've carefully aligned my fence with the edge of the tenoning jig. Then, to make sure that it's good and square, I've taken a square along the bottom edge of the tenoning jig and bumped it up against the fence to verify everything's square. Clamped it in place, and now I'll go ahead and mount it. To mount the fence to the jig, I'm going to be using 3 number 8 by 2 inch long drywall screws. So I'll start out by drilling and countersinking for those screws. I'm not going to glue my fence to the tenoning jig. I'm just going to rely on the 3 screws to hold it in place. At a later date, if I want to use a different thickness fence, this gives me the option to change it. When making tenons, generally you start out by making the shoulder cuts all the way around the workpiece. Then, using a tenoning jig, you make the cheek cuts, and that's what our jig will be doing for you. To use the tenoning jig, it's just a matter of placing the jig on top of your fence, raising your blade height so that it'll cut away all the material that you want to be wasted away. Clamp your workpiece in place, and I would set my rip fence a little bit wide, take a test cut, and then move the rip fence in a little bit each time until I get the step just right from the face of the part onto the end of the tenon. And that would be creating our cheek cut. And of course, you can spin the part around, reclamp it, and take your second cut, and that way you have both cheek cuts made perfectly, and the tenon would be perfectly centered about the stock. Now I will say these clamps work out real good and they're very convenient. Just make sure that you adjust your plungers so that they clamp the workpiece securely. When feeding the stock through, keep your right hand on the far side of our workpiece support and your left hand up near the top, and of course hold on to the workpiece so that you can feel if it's slipping at all. And that way your hands are clear and safe with the saw blade as you make that tenoning cut. Well, that about wraps it up for this issue's Time Saver.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you truly enjoyed it, please help us share this information with the rest of the communities. Please hit the subscribe button, give us a big thumbs up, and be sure to tell your friends about this channel. Thanks again for watching.